Hello, here's Dieter speaking, and I want to show you in this patch how to do latency compensation when communicating with external MIDI and audio gear. So just as a pretext, I tried this multiple times and had a lot of problems with the MIDI clock. I hope it will work now, but yeah, we will see. So let's first talk a little bit about how the system is set up. So I have an external Elektron Syntakt groovebox which is connected over USB, delivering MIDI and audio. So the MIDI is coming in here. So since we want to control the patch also with the transport from the external gear, we have to use the external MIDI clock, which hopefully doesn't make any problems later on. So we get our MIDI clock here and we get our audio back here. We then use to do the calibration. So this clock signals is going to the new OrangeLine module CRON, and CRON will tap the 24 ppm clock, calculate a BPM value, which is handed over to swing, and this BPM value together with the clock N from to sync on the beat will deliver everything we need later on to do our micro timing. So let's first look what swing is putting out here. So let's start our MIDI clock. So we now have our MIDI clock running, and the blue is here is the phase which swing is producing. This phase is going to, let's look at the first one, the local gator. Local gator means that it's meant for timing voices which create sound in VCVRack, which has to be synchronized to sound created on the Elektron box. So CRON allows us to do the latency compensation, but let's go step for step. So what we have connected here in yellow is the so-called latency controlled compare value. And here's MIDI, that's wrong, that's the local. It's already, no, it's local, why green? Unused. Crazy. Okay, so let's go here. That's just double. So, sorry. Okay, so this gauges doing the following. They look at the phase, and whenever the phase is crossing the compare value given, it will create an output gate if there is an input gate. So we will later see that we're running our sequences not in trigger mode but in gate mode. So at the moment we have here our latency compensation for channel 1 set to 0. That means that the latency correction compare value is also 0, and you see that the red line, which is the clock signal the gator is giving, is exactly on the crossing between the phase and our compare value. So we have no latency compensation for the local voices. And the same is for here on the right, our triggers or gates for sequencing a voice on our external gear is also, if you look here, select channel 2, is also set to 0. So it's also on the 0 crossing. So at the moment the gates used in this patch for creating like local voices, and the gates created to run a voice on the Elektron by sending MIDI are just running on the clock N of our MIDI interface. So naturally, we will have to fight some latency here, because when we create a local voice, that's the clicking you hear all the time, because here we have a sequencer which is running, which is clocked by the so-called early clock of our swing. So it's clocked at the start of the phase, so we know when the 0 crossing is, whether we have a gate or not to produce by gator. So channel 1 of our sequencer is producing just gates for a 4 on the floor. Those gates are going to this local gator, which then creates a timed trigger in its output based on the already explained phase and comp value given. So the click you hear, as I already said, is coming from, I don't have a voice here, it's just the trigger, the timed trigger this gator module is producing for running voices inside our rack patch. Now to get the latency right, we will have also on our syntax a pulse set up, in our case channel 10 playing 4 on the 4, which is then running into here, where we see here in the middle we see our clock we get here, which is just our local clock. When we unmute the sequence, or no, we want to check for local voices first. Okay, so let's unlock the sequence, so unmute the sequence on our Elektron, and now you see here you get this pulse signals, yeah, and I'll just make it a little bit bigger. So what you see here is that the sound we get here is later than our local clock, and if you listen you hear 2 clicks. The one is the pulse from the Syntakt, and the one is the local clock. So the Syntakt pulse is late because the local clock runs in sync with the MIDI clock from Syntakt, and the sound from Syntakt has to be arrive here in this audio module first, which takes time. So if we have our local voice trigger, which we see at this green line, and we have at the same timing a sequence running on Syntakt, this Syntakt sequence would be out of sync with our local voice. So what we have to do now is we have to lay our local timing for our local voice to get in sync with the same sequenced pulses on the Syntakt. I do that by moving that down here to have a better view and making that a little bit bigger. Our local latency correction is on channel 1 of our polyphonic output, and if we now do a positive latency, you see the green line, which is the clock for our local voice, getting later. The blue line is the clock N we get from MIDI. So now you don't hear any double click anymore. Maybe a little bit, we are too far, so we tune it in to get the click synced. So, okay. What we now have is that we are triggering our local voices a little bit later than the sequencer is triggering its voices, and by triggering a little bit later in VCVRack we get our local triggers and local sound in sync with the sound created on our syntax. But that's only half of the solution, and the more easy one, because in this case we just have to delay. We could do that much easier. But now let's focus on the other side of the problem, which is a little bit more difficult to solve. You see already here the comp value, yeah, it's not a straight line. That's because the MIDI clock is wobbling a little bit. CRON is doing a lot of smoothing, but still you have a little bit unstable clock here, but you can't hear that. So at least I don't hear that. Okay. Why do we have this green line here? Because this is the local one. Oh, this is also the local one. We have to put that down here. So, okay. So, we calibrated our local compare value to be late enough to sync correctly external sequenced sound to our local sound. Now let's stop or mute the channel which is sequenced on our Elektron box, so we don't have any sound from the Syntakt. What we now do is, I have a second channel. I could have used the same channel here, it's silly. So, okay, so we don't need two channels. I use now the same sequencer I used to sequence my local voice to send this to the MIDI out to the syntax when I turn here this MIDI on. So what we now have is here in green is our local clock, which is compensating for local voices, and you see that now the Syntakt voice, which is controlled over MIDI from our patch, is late. And that has to do that when we put out the MIDI information at the same time, then the Syntakt is producing sound, or our local clock is running, the MIDI has to go to the Syntakt first, which causes again latency. So what we need is to have a negative latency compensation here. So as set up here, we have a second gator doing a different timing on a different compare value, and this compare value we take from channel 2 of our CRON module. Yeah, so when we go here to channel 2, we have still 0. That means we send out the MIDI exactly at the same time then the MIDI clock is going. Because it's too late, we have to get it earlier. So we need negative compensation. So now with channel 2, we can now just use a negative latency compensation and just put it about 12 milliseconds. Yeah, a little bit more, 13, 15 milliseconds or so. And now you see that our pulse is more or less, it's still wobbling a little bit. That's because the MIDI clock isn't super stable, but it's enough to not really hear it. Yeah, we can try a little bit. If you go further, we have 2. Here we have also 2 clicks, and if we go here around, yeah, so now we are quite good. So now we are finished calibrating. So we have set our calibration values in CRON for around 15 milliseconds for outgoing MIDI and about 30 or milliseconds for outgoing audio. Those values of course change when you change audio buffer sizes and your setup. You have to check that your values are correct. Okay, I think we've finished. I'm quite happy we didn't get problems with the MIDI clock at that moment. I have to warn you that at least when I'm recording, that I don't know why, the MIDI CV clock very often just starts to drop triggers. I don't know why that is, or whether it's a bug or a feature, but that gave me a lot of problem going out of sync here, which I never had without recording this video. Okay, that was quite a long video, I think, and I hope it was not too complicated and gives you a little hint upon what the new CRON module can do for you. So let's stop our sequence on my Elektron box, and now we are silent again. Goodbye.